Petronas is a Malaysian multinational oil and gas company. The company was founded on August 17, 1974 by the Government of Malaysia, Abdul Rahman Ya'kub, Abdul Taib Mahmud, and Tengku Razaleigh Hamzah. And to this very day, the company is still alive and healthy. So, how did it become so popular? Let's find out. Origins. Before the formation of Malaysia, Royal Dutch Shell, now known as Shell plc, first began the oil exploration in Miri, Sarawak, after Charles Brooks signed the first oil mining lease in 1909. In 1910, the first oil well was drilled in Miri. This oil well is later known as the Grand Old Lady. In 1929, oil was discovered in Brunei. There were no other drilling activities in Borneo or British Malaya until the 1950s. Shell was still the only oil company in the area in 1963, when the Federation of Malaya had achieved independence from Britain 6 years earlier, united with Sarawak and Sabah, both on the island of Borneo, to become Malaysia. Authorities in both new states maintained a close relationship with Shell, which brought Malaysia's first offshore oil field to fruition in 1968. In 1966, the Enactment of Petroleum Mining Act gave Exxon and Shell rights to explore oil territories and produce oil royalties and tax payments to the government. In the late 1960s, Esso and Continental Oil were given concessions to explore oil off the shores of the east coast of peninsular Malaysia. By 1974, Malaysia's output of crude oil stood at about 90,000 barrels per day to 99,000 barrels per day. 20th century. Several factors converged in the early 1970s to prompt the Malaysian government into setting up a state-owned oil and gas company. In 1972, the oil price per barrel was $1.50 in U.S. currency, which later rose to $2.28 in U.S. currency per barrel. War in the Middle East and an oil embargo by the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, also known as OPEC, caused the price per barrel to rise 12 U.S. dollars, which further incentivized Malaysia to set up its own oil company. Several countries such as United Arab Emirates, Egypt, and Indonesia have adopted the production sharing agreement instead of a concession system for oil revenue distribution. The Malaysian government also believed that foreign oil companies did not properly inform the government regarding the oil exploration activities in their own concessions, such as the new discovery of oil fields, thus resulted in a loss of revenue to the government. The formulation of Malaysian new economic policy in the early 1970s encourages Malaysians to take control of various modern industries and take open more economic opportunities for the Bumi Putrias. The former Sarawak Chief Minister, Abdul Rahman Ya'kub, was the first one of who proposed the idea of Malaysians setting up an oil company in 1965. When he was later the Deputy Federal Lands and Mines Minister. It was due to the pressure of Sarawak people who sought to clarify the exact boundaries of Sarawak territorial waters. In fact, since the formation of Malaysia in 1963, the issued territorial waters of Sabah and Sarawak has not been fully addressed, thus leaving its interpretation wide open. The Sarawak government has declared that the territorial waters extend well beyond the 3-mile limit defined by the Malaysian federal government. However, Abdul Rahman was reminded of Abdul Razak Hussein's act of installing him as the Sarawak chief minister. Therefore, Rahman decided to keep the conflict as a low profile as possible. Rahman's nephew, Abdul Taib Mahmud, assumed the role of Federal Deputy Land and Mines Minister after Rahman became Education Minister, and later the Sarawak Chief Minister, Taib, believed in the sharing of oil royalties between the state and the federal government. During the time, the oil mining activities in Sarawak were still under the exclusive control of Shell. Tai initially suggested allowing independent contractors to market government oil. Tai found a Lebanese trader to purchase the Malaysian oil. However, the contractor defaulted on payments, resulting in $4 million loss. A government hydrocarbon committee was later set up. Tai visited Indonesia and had a discussion with the Indonesian state-owned oil and gas company Pertamina. Tai suggested that Malaysia scrap the concession system and replace it with a production sharing agreement. However, there were no laws that allowed Malaysia to take back the concessions without compensating foreign oil companies. Despite this, Tai decided to set up a statutory body named Hydrocarbon Malaysia, which would have total rights of oil found in the territorial waters of Sabah and Sarawak. However, Rahman protested his nephew's decision and threatened to take the federal government to court if Sarawak were to be left out of this oil deal. Tengku Razaleigh Hamzah, and the then chairman of Perbadanan Nasional Berhad, also known as PERNAS, visited Rahman and the latter's private residence in Kuching. Tengku Razaleigh suggested the formation of a company instead of a statutory body where the former would distribute profits equally between the federal and the state governments. Rahman agreed with the suggestion. Tengku Razaleigh drafted the Petroleum Development Act together with his associates in secret, as instructed by Tun Razak, and to be completed before the 1974 Malaysian general election. Rahman then called Tengku Razaleigh to ask about the terms offered by the Malaysian federal government. Tengku Razaleigh then told Rahman regarding abolishment of the concession system. Meanwhile, 5% oil royalty will be given to the respective oil-producing states. Rahman agreed with the deal. In 1974, the Petroleum Development Act was tabled and approved in Parliament. Petronas was established and incorporated on August 17, 1974, pursuant to the Malaysian Companies Act 1965, with a paid-up capital of 10 million RM. Tengku Razaleigh became its inaugural chairman. Business tycoon and Tengku Razaleigh's close friend Ananda Krishan also played a crucial role in Petronas' establishment following his experience as an international oil trader. At the time of its establishment, Petronas' headquarters was originally situated at the wooden building within the Prime Minister's office complex in Jalan Dato' On, Kuala Lumpur, with only 18 staff and 2 telephone lines before moving to a smaller office at the E&E Plaza, Jalan Pudu, in mid-1975. Tengku Razaleigh pointed at all the areas where the oil was discovered to be wholly owned by Petronas. He said that the oil company that will explore the resource will only be a contractor, and negotiations with state governments will be carried out to obtain an exclusive exploration license by Petronas. In October 1974, the company planned a framework to set up a petrochemical company which cost 300 million RM to make fertilizers, plastic materials, and artificial yarns. Initially, Exxon and Shell refused to surrender their concessions and refused to negotiate with Petronas. Petronas then issued a notice to all foreign oil companies that after April 1st, 1975, all foreign oil companies would be operating illegally in Malaysian waters if they do not start negotiations with Petronas. After a few rounds of negotiations, foreign oil companies finally surrendered their concessions to Petronas. While all other oil-producing states in Malaysia signed the petroleum agreement, Mustafa Huran, the Sabah chief minister, stubbornly refused to sign, complaining of the agreed 5% oil royalty. Mustafa requested 10 to 20% oil royalty, threatening to pull Sabah out of Malaysia. Tengku Razaleigh refused to budge. The Malaysian federal government then made another deal with Razaleigh, who was out of favor with Tun Mustafa, to establish Berjaya Party and oust Tun Mustafa. However, Harris was reluctant to become the Sabah chief minister, and Fuad Stephens was asked to assume the chief minister post if Berjaya were to come to power. Berjaya successfully ousted Tun Mustafa in the 1976 Sabah state election. 1 week after the 1976 air crash which killed Fuad and other 5 state ministers, Harris signed the oil agreement. With Sabah entering the oil agreement, Petronas finally has total control of all oil and gas reserves in Malaysia. On September 1st, 1975, Petronas made its first shipment of 358,000 barrels of crude oil to Japan, about 14 months before the first petroleum production sharing contract, also known as PSC, was signed. The company began to supply between 8,000 and 10,000 barrels of crude oil per day to the Philippines through an agreement signed on June 11, 1976. The agreement was reached through negotiations between Petronas and the Philippine National Oil Company, also known as PNOC, where Petronas is led by its chairman and CEO Tengku Razaleigh Hamzah, while the PNOC is led by its chairman Germinio Z. Velasco. In November 1976, Petronas announced it would provide aviation fueling facilities for the Bayan Lepas International Airport, also now known as Penang International Airport, followed by 2 airports from 1978. Petronas first embarked on the oil exploration and production activities with the formation of Petronas Cargill in 1978. On April 1st, 1978, Petronas signed an agreement with Mitsubishi Corporation and Shell to set up a joint venture LNG company, Malaysia LNG, with a cost of 2.31 billion RM. Through the joint venture, Petronas holds a 65% of equity interest, while Mitsubishi and Shell hold 17.5% each. In May of the same year, Petronas began its first crude oil export from Kula and Tapes wells in Terengganu waters into the United States. The export is subject to an agreement signed with Pecten Company from the United States that Petronas agrees to supply 10,000 barrels of crude oil per day for a year to the country. Later in June, the installation work of an oil exploration rig co-owned by Petronas and Esso began underway, enabling them to process 35,000 barrels of crude oil per day in Bekok, Terengganu. The Bekok rig, which costs 68 million RM, has the capacity to drill 12 wells simultaneously, and oil production work would likely begin in September. In 1979, Petronas was commissioned by the government as the Malaysian shareholder in the ASEAN Eura project in Indonesia, and also an agency to make the project a success for the country. In 1980, the Petronas expanded its downstream business by setting up the ASEAN fertilizer plant in Bintulu, Sarawak. In May 1980, Petronas signed a production sharing agreement with BP Petroleum Development, Oceanic Exploration and Development, a division of British Petroleum Corporation BP, covering an area offshore Sabah. Under the agreement, these companies will prospect for hydrocarbons in an area of 3,660 square kilometers off the northeast of Sabah. Petronas' exploration subsidiary, Petronas Cargill and BP, serves as the project's joint operators. 2 months later, Petronas applying 50% of LPG output into Summit Petroleum to help the latter stay on as a gas supplier in the market. It also has undertaken to supply 230 tons of LPG to Summit per month. In 1982, Petronas, through its subsidiary, Petronas Cargill, began to build 5 platforms in the Duyung and Sotong fields, about 224 kilometers off the coast of Terengganu. 3 of the gas platforms will involve exploration, gas processing, and another will house workers. All 5 platforms will be built by a Johorian company. Subsequently, in early November, Petronas signed an agreement with Esso for sales and purchases of a natural gas for Phase 1 of the Terengganu gas project. The company's first drill ships for the operations of its subsidiary, Petronas Caragalli, was launched on January 15, 1983 as a Promet Shipyard, Singapore. It was built at a cost of approximately 70 million RM. The drill ship was named as the Promesaria by Suhali Noah, wife of the then Petronas advisor Hussein On, while at the same time it intended to supply the LPG to Singapore for the use by the petrochemical complex in Pulau, area Mabu, as well as in addition to the gas supply promised earlier for the power stations here. Subsequently, in mid-1983, Petronas drilling subsidiary Petronas Marine was established to handle drilling contract work that required for the company's exploration of oil and gas. Petronas, through its trading subsidiary, Petronas Dagon, began to set up a service station in September 1983 and planned to open 300 stations nationwide by 1990. In 1984, Petronas moved to Dalyubami after occupying various buildings in Kuala Lumpur. The company then acquired the Dalyubami podium and tower block from the Urban Development Authority for 443 million RM after a sale agreement was signed 4 years later, in June 1988. The company sold a 5% stake in Malaysia LNG to the Sarawak state government in late 1985 for an undisclosed sum with a 60% share. On June 11, 1988, Petronas signed 16 PSC with a consortium comprising 2 leading American and 1 Canadian firms, while concurrently entering into an exploration boom. These companies and Petroleum, Champlain, and Gulf Canada will cooperate with Petronas exploration subsidiary Petronas Caragalli to jointly explore oil in the Straits of Malacca. On March 24, 1989, Petronas signed a 15-year PSC with Sarawak Shell, in which its exploration arm, Petronas Caragalli, would take over oil fields operated by Sarawak Shell in Baram Delta of Sarawak. Oil exploration was by no means at an end and could not yet produce more reserves. The Selagi field, which came on stream at the end of the 1988 and was developed by Esso Production Malaysia, was one of the richest oil fields so far found in Malaysia waters, and further concessions to majors would encourage exploration to deeper waters around Malaysia, where unknown reserves could be discovered. Meanwhile, computerized seismography made it both feasible and commercially justifiable to re-explore fields which had been abandoned or were assumed to be unproductive over the past century. In 1990, Petronas invited the foreign companies to re-explore parts of the sea off Sabah and Sarawak on the bias of new surveys using up-to-date techniques. Another way to postpone depletion was to develop sources of oil and its substitute natural gas outside of Malaysia. Late in 1989, the governments of Vietnam and Myanmar invited Petronas Caragalli to take part in joint ventures to explore oil in their coastal waters. In 1990, a new unit, Petronas Caragalli Overseas, was curated to take up a 15% interest in a field in Myanmar's waters being explored by Idemitsu Myanmar Oil Exploration Company Limited, a subsidiary of the Japanese firm Idemitsu Oil Development Company Limited, in a production sharing agreement with Myanmar Oil and Gas Enterprise. Thus began Petronas' first oil exploration outside Malaysia. In May 1990, the government of Malaysia and Thailand settled a long-running dispute over their respective rights to an area of 7,300 square kilometers in the Gulf of Thailand by setting up a joint administrative authority for the area and encouraging a joint oil exploration project by Petronas, the Petroleum Authority of Thailand, and the U.S. company Triton Oil. In a separate deal in October 1990, the Petroleum Authority of Thailand arranged with Petronas to study the feasibility of transferring natural gas from this jointly administered area through Malaysia to Thailand. By the way, an extension of the pipelines laid for the third stage of the Peninsular Gas Utilization Project. That project was on course to becoming a major element in the postponement of oil depletion. Contracts for line pipes for the second stage of the project were signed in 1989 with two consortia of Malaysian, Japanese, and Brazilian companies. This stage, completed in 1991, included the laying of 730 kilometers of pipeline through to the tip of the peninsula, from where the gas could be sold to Singapore and Thailand. The conversion of two power stations, Port Dickson and Gadong, from oil to gas, and the expansion of Petronas' output of methyl tert butyl ether propylene and propylene, which were already being produced in joint ventures with Idemitsu Petrochemical Company of Japan, Neste Oy of Finland. The third and final stage of the project was to lay pipelines along the northwest and northeast coastlines of the peninsula, and was completed in 1997. Another new venture in 1990 in ship owning, since Petronas' existing arrangements with MISC and Nigeria's state oil company would be inadequate to transport the additional exports of LNG due to start in 1994 under the contract with Sahbu Gas. In February 1991, Petronas announced its intent to begin oil and gas exploration in deep water offshores, while citing that most shallow areas have been taken up. In August the same year, Petronas began sending two cargoes of its new Dulong crude oil for spot processing in China and Singapore to ensure its good quality. Petronas, through Petronas Caragali, signed an agreement with Vietnamese oil company PetroVietnam in September 1991 to exploring oil in two offshore areas in the southern coast of Vietnam. The company began to supply 15,000 barrels of crude oil for 1 year term from October to two refineries belongs to the Petroleum Authority of Thailand in an agreement signed on September 24th. In October, the company acquired 15 and 20% stakes in two oil exploration blocks in China, with each blocks in the Gulf of Bohai and the Pearl River Mouth Basin, respectively, from the British Petroleum. Prior to the acquisition, Petronas has signed a PSC for two offshore blocks in Vietnam. In early 1992, Petronas began to commission two additional oil platforms in Barnoia field in the Barham Delta off Sarawak. The company then secured 510 million RM loan on February 15, 1992 to a part finance on a massive gas transmission network. The loan is provided by Employees Provident Fund EPF and guaranteed by 10 financial institutions as well as Petronas gas officials. Petronas and the two consortia of Malaysian and Japanese companies signed a joint venture agreement on March 30th to set up a natural gas distribution of Peninsular Malaysia, in which the company holds 20% shares, while MMC Sapdu Holdings and Tokyo Gas Mitsu holds the remaining 55 and 25% shares, respectively. 2 months later, in May 1992, Petronas starts negotiations with Mobil and Shell to renew term contracts, which to be expired in July, for processing its domestic crude oil while seeking for lower fees in Singapore. On May 12th, Petronas, through its marine subsidiary Petronas Marine, allocates 5,139.5 million RM from the offshore capital markets to provide financial assistance to 3 of 5 new LNG tankers. It is the largest indications ever made by Petronas. In July, a 1-year term deal has been renewed. It also has another contract with BP to process 5,000 barrels of oil per day, which to be expired in September. The company signed a joint venture agreement with Nova Corp in September that year to set up a new energy company, Oil, Gas, and Petrochemical Technical Services, which would act as a management consultant of several projects. In February 1993, Petronas partnered with American oil and gas company Conoco Incorporation to jointly develop a second Petronas-owned oil refinery in the country. The refinery is to be located in Tongga Batu, Sanggu Ondong District, Malacca, and the capacity to refine 100,000 to 130,000 barrels of sour crude per day. The company began to stop processing crude oil in Singapore beginning July 1993, citing as there has been no accord yet with 2 refineries for renewing term processing. In August, it also had reduced term crude oil processing in that country due to higher refining fees for that year, 1993, and shrinking profit margins. This after negotiations with one of 2 refineries to renew contracts was expired a month earlier. The company, through Petronas Marine, also signed a 20-year agreement with Mitsubishi's wholly owned subsidiary Mitsubishi Heavy Industries to repair and maintain 5 LNG tankers. Petronas and Tengku Nasional signed a power agreement on October 1st, 1993 to enable the latter supplying electricity to the company's Phase 1 refinery project, also known as PSR1, at Sungai Udang for the future industrial development needs in the surrounding areas. 6 days later, it partnered with Sarawak Shell to spend 9 billion RM over a 20-year period to develop gas fields off the east of the Sarawak. On February 17, 1994, the first shipment of 400,000 barrels of crude oil arrived in new refinery at Tonga Batu, 14 kilometers from Kereth, Terengganu. The second Petronas refinery in Tonga Batu that was completed and began operations in May 1994 with a capacity of 100,000 barrels per day promoted the same policy. The fact of it was built in a joint venture with Samsung of Korea, the Chinese Petroleum Corporation of Taiwan, and Caltex of the United States did not negate with the policy for the subsidiary company Petronas Petronas Malaki had a decisive 45% equity while sharing the enormous costs and gaining advanced technology for the project. More to the point, a side effect of the refinery's completion was that Petronas was able to refine all of the crude oil it produced, instead of being partially dependent on refining facilities in Singapore. It also signed an 11 billion yen syndicated term loan to refinance existing yen loans, which that linked to its gas grid project in Luban in August that year. Petronas linked a long-term agreement with Tohoku Electric Power in July to supply 500,000 tons of LNG annually to the latter. By the end of August 1994, the company shuts down output from the offshore Taib field in order to underwent a routine maintenance. It also has stopped producing oil from the field in the South China Sea on August 27th. During the mid to late 1990s, international exploration, development, and production remained key components in Petronas' strategy along with diversification. A key discovery was made in the Ruby field in Vietnam in 1994. That year, the firm also saw its first overseas production in the Dai Hung field in Vietnam and established its first retail station outside Malaysia and Cambodia. On November 2, 1994, Petronas signed a contract with Mobil to explore for oil in deep water areas of the South China Sea. The contract consists of 2 blocks off Borneo Island, above all Sarawak. A week later, on November 9th, Petronas signed an agreement with Conoco to build a second crude oil refinery where Petronas holds a 45% stake in the venture of Conoco holds the remaining 40%. In 1995, the subsidiary was created to import, store, and distribute liquefied petroleum gas (LPG). In addition, the company Pilothon Line plant in Kereth began operations. Petronas marked a significant milestone during this time. 2 of its subsidiaries, Petronas Dagengon and Petronas Gas, went public on the Kuala Lumpur Stock Exchange, now Bursa, Malaysia. The company formed a contract with China National Offshore Oil Corporation and Chevron Overseas Petroleum in July 1995 to begin exploration of the Block 0231 on the Liaodong Bay area in China. Petronas went on to sign an agreement with 4 companies in August to supply gas to the third LNG plant project in Sarawak. Those companies, Occidental Petroleum, Sarawak Shell, Petronas Karagali, and Nippon Oil, jointly developed and produced gas from the central Laconia area in offshore Sarawak. In September, the company, through its subsidiary Petronas Karagali, expanding outside Southeast Asia, began to extract oil in Syria, which had been made from the exploratory wells drilled in the East Ash Saham blocks. The company signed a deal with the Japanese government to sell LNG in Sendai City in Japan. Under a deal signed on November 15, 1995, Petronas would supply up to 152,000 tons of LNG annually to Sendai for 20 years starting in May 1997. In December, the company linked a deal with Japan's Nippon Oil, Occidental LNG, and Shell Gas BV of the Netherlands to build a multi-billion-dollar natural gas plant, which is the third to be built in Malaysia. In March 1996, the company began to undertaking a petrochemical master plan study and helped to formulate a gas master plan for the Indo-Chinese country. Subsequently, it partnered with Sinopec, Zhuhai, Yuhai Petrochemical, Nisho Aiwa Corporation, Guangdong Province Petroleum Enterprise Group, and Yangzheng Company to envision construction of a liquefied petroleum gas bottling, storage, and distribution plant in Yangzheng City, Guangdong, China. In May the same year, Petronas entered the aromatics market by way of a joint venture with Japanese conglomerate Mitsubishi Corporation, the curated Aromatics Malaysia. As part of its globalization plan, the company purchased 30% stake of the former Sub-Saharan branch of Mobil Oil in June, rebranded as Engine Petroleum. While the Asian economy as a whole suffered from the economic crisis during 1997 and 1998, Malaysia was quick to bounce back due to successful government reforms from its new headquarters in Petronas Twin Towers. The state-owned company continued its development in the oil and gas industry. During 1997, Petronas heightened its diversification efforts. In February, Petronas and German chemical company BASF agreed to co-embark the construction and operation of 3 petrochemical plants in Gebeng Industrial Estate in Kuantan, Pahang. In February, Petronas and German chemical company BASF agreed to co-embark on the construction and operation of 3 petrochemical plants in the Gebeng Industrial Estate in Kuantan, Pahang. Petronas partnered with British petroleum company BP through its subsidiary BP Chemicals to jointly invest a 500,000 tons per annum acetic acid plant in Kuantan. The plant scheduled to begin operations at the end of 1999. On March 21st, the company introduced an incentive in its PSC to encourage more exploration investments and to enhance the country's oil and gas reserves through a new concept called revenue over cost, which aimed to reward efficient contractors. Its first LPG joint venture in China was launched on March 29th that year. Subsequently, in August the same year, Petronas, through its subsidiary Petronas Chemicals, partnered with BASF to set up a joint venture company, BASF Petronas Chemicals. The new joint venture operates in Verbund integrated site located in the Gebeng Industrial Zone, Pahang. The company's shares capital is 60% held by BASF, while the remaining 40% held by Petronas. A month later, the company announced the aromatics complex in Kerti, Terengganu, which adjacent to its refinery operated by Petronas Pasipin. Terengganu began construction by a consortium led by Toyo Engineering Corporation, and it's scheduled to commence operations by the fourth quarter of 1999. On September 16th, the company acquired a 29.3% interest in Malaysia International Shipping Corporation, Berhad MISC. In 1998, Petronas tanker subsidiary Petronas Tankers merged with MISC, increasing the company's stake in the MISC 62%. In March, the company acquired the entire shipping business from consortium Perkaplan, and a cash deal with which both companies denied was a bailout instead of the listed vehicle of the then Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad Mirzan. That year, Petronas introduced the Petronas E01, the country's first commercial prototype engine. The company also signed a total of 5 new production sharing contracts, PSCs, in 1998 and 1999 began oil production in the Siri field in Iran. On April 1st, 1998, Petronas began to change its crude pricing mechanism Under the new mechanism, the new monthly crude prices will use 100% base components of Asia Petroleum Prices Index, also known as APPI, quotes. In March 1999, Petronas signed a memorandum of understanding MOU with South African oil company Sasol Limited to explore incorporation between two companies, including establishment of a new company. On March 25, 1999, the company's science center, PetroScience, was established and began operations to provide an information learning center on the petroleum industry and related technology. The company also began to diversify into non-traditional countries like Indonesia, India, and China. On December 7, 1999, the company signed a deal with the Burnean energy company SKBB Holdings to cooperate in petroleum and related businesses. The deal enabled SKBB to import, store, and sell Petronas petroleum products through retail stations in Brunei under the Petronas brand. 21st century. In March 2000, the company finalized an oil production deal in Chad, North Africa. On July 19, 2000, the company discovered oil in the Samarang Asam Paya production sharing contract area in Sabah. The tests carried out showed that the Lab 1 well-flowed oil at a rate of 4,700 barrels per day. Petronas and Indonesian oil and gas company Pertamina inked a maiden oil refining and gas sale deal on October 5, 2000, in which the company will buy natural gas by Pertamina. Petronas, in June 2001, began to introduce the natural gas-powered Envrio 2000 cars to Thailand, while it had signed a 3-year pact with the Petroleum Authority of Thailand to introduce the 5-seater cars. In September, the company forged deals for 2 new exploration plots in Pakistan and began construction on the Chad-Cameroon Integrated Oil Development and Pipeline Project. Petronas announced on November 9, 2001 that it was in talks with BP to acquire the latter's third stake in Singapore Refining Company. By 2002, Petronas has signed 7 new PSCs and secured stakes in 8 exploration blocks in 8 countries, including Gabon, Cameroon, Niger, Egypt, Yemen, Indonesia, and Vietnam. The firm also made considerable progress in its petrochemical strategy, opening a new gas-based petrochemical facilities in Kereth and Gabon. It also planned to divest its remaining 15.4% of its shares in Proton in order to help the government-owned investment arm consolidate shares in the car maker. In May the same year, Petronas announced to introduce the natural gas-powered Envrio 2000 cars to the Philippines in order to promote the usage of clean and cheap fuel, while also planning to expand operations there. The company announced in June that it was interested to acquire stakes in Singapore Refining. In September 2002, Petronas discovered new oil and gas reserves in the Turkmen part of Caspian Sea with a flow rate of 14,176 barrels of oil and 19.5 million standard cubic feet. The company buy out minority shareholders in oil group Energy Africa in December. By 2003, Malaysia was to usurp Algeria as the world's second largest producer of LNG with the completion of the Malaysia LNG Tiga plant. Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad commented on the achievement in a May 2003 Bernama article, claiming that the Petronas LNG complex now serves as another shining example of a vision realized for a national aspiration transformed into reality by the same belief among Malaysians that we can do it. In 2004, the Prime Minister's Department, Mustafa Mohamad, stated that the Petronas contributed 25 billion RM to the country's treasury, accounting for 25% of the revenue collected via dividends and other revenues. In January the same year, Petronas has linked a joint venture for an offshore oil exploration project in the Philippines. The company announced in November that it would likely to privatize more subsidiaries as it pursues costly international expansion, which former Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad said that it should remain in state hands, while stated that it all depends upon the finances of Malaysians. On May 2, 2006, Petronas awarded a deepwater exploration block in offshore Vietnam in a joint venture deal with Chevron Corporation. The PSC Block 122, which covers 6,981 square kilometers, marks the company's first deepwater acreage in Vietnamese territory. In October the same year, Petronas signed a 25-year agreement with China's Shanghai LNG to supply 3.03 million tons of LNG per year. The deal was estimated at $25 billion based on current prices. It became Petronas' first LNG deal with China and marked a milestone in the expansion for its relationship with the country. The LNG will be delivered from the company's LNG complex in Bintulu, Sarawak, to Shanghai LNG's receiving terminal in Zhejiang province. On September 20th, 2007, Petronas has reached an agreement to acquire the Italian lubricant manufacturing company FL Selenia from Kohlberg Kravis Roberts (KKR) for about 1.4 billion RM, subject to regulatory approval. In November 2007, the company acquired Star Energy for 6.9 million RM with the aim to gain control of the UK's second largest onshore oil producer, but later divested in 2011 when iGas Energy acquired stakes in Star Energy from Petronas. Petronas said that the divestment of Star Energy enabled it to focus on optimizing the Humbly Groove gas storage facility as part of its strategy to focus on growing its European asset returns through marketing and trading. Petronas continued to focus on international exploration projects, as 40% of the revenue in 2008 was derived from international projects such as Iran, Sudan, Chad, and Mauritania. The company's international reserves stood at 6.24 billion barrels oil equivalent in 2008. The Petronas overseas expansion drive continues with the acquisition of Woodside Energy's Mauritania assets for $418 million in 2007. The venture proved successful as they discovered oil in May 2008. Petronas signed a 63 million RM deal on September 1st, 2010 to acquire BP's interest in two petrochemical plants in Terengganu. On July 26, 2011, Petronas signed two gas supply agreements related to Cabanangan Cluster PSC area off Sabah. These deals aim to distribute natural gas from the cluster PSCs to both customer sectors in Sabah and to the company's LNG complex in Bintulu, Sarawak. The first agreement involved in the company acquired gas from the PSC contractors by acting as an aggregator, while the second involved Petronas and the PSC contractors as joint sellers to MLNG Dua. 2 days later, Petronas, through its exploration subsidiary Petronas Karagali, has discovered two significant natural gas fields in shallow waters off the west coast of Sabah. These discoveries were made at the Zuhal East 1 well in Samarang Ahasam Paya block on the Megadati in the Megatal 1 well in block FB 312. The estimated gas initially in place for these divorces was about 550 billion standard cubic feet BCF and 650 BCF respectively. In November, Petronas was in talks with several of its oil and gas counterparts, including Royal Dutch Shell and ExxonMobil, to develop petrochemical plants within its 25.8 billion RM refinery complex in Johor. In July 2012, Petronas announced its intent to acquire Canadian energy company Progress Energy Resources for about $5.3 billion. The acquisition will allow Petronas control of vast shale gas reserves in Canada. On October 29, 2012, Petronas sources said it would renew a bid for Progress Energy Resources after Canada blocked its bid earlier that month. The $6 billion bid approved by Ottawa on December 7, 2012. The company's acquisition of Progress Energy was completed and approved by the then Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper on December 10th. Petronas acquired about 100,000 barrels of 95-octane petrol from the Singapore spot market in November 2012, which is considered a rare move by Singaporean traders. On January 17, 2013, Petronas issued a statement that an onshore oil and gas discovery has been made in the state after drilling a test well about 20 kilometers away from the city of Mary in northern Sarawak. The well was found to have a net hydrocarbon thickness of 349 meters. It had flow rates of 440 barrels of crude oil per day and 11.5 million standard cubic feet of gas per day. The find is the first onshore oil discovery in Malaysia in 24 years. In July, the company planned to sell its stake in a $20 billion Canadian LNG export to project as low as 50%, while intended to share the cost of the bringing cheap energy to Asia. It also in talks with Sinopec to obtain at least 10% of equity stake. In September, Petronas withdrew from Petro Carabobo crude oil project in Venezuela following disagreements with the Venezuelan authorities and state-run PDVSA. On May 2, 2015, Petronas completed its acquisition of oil and gas assets in Azerbaijan from Norwegian oil company Statoil, now Equinor, for $2.25 billion. Plagued by the 2010s oil glut, Petronas reported on February 26, 2015 that it cut its 2015 capital expenditures budget after reporting a $2 billion fourth quarter loss, the company's first loss since it began reporting quarterly results 5 years ago. In October, despite the tumble in oil and gas prices that has hurt its profitability, the company reaffirms its commitment to its LNG project to Canada, which began in September. The proposed company's LNG project in Canada was approved by the Canadian government in September 2016. Petronas announced in March 2016 that it would lay off 1,000 of its workers as part of a corporate restructuring scheme which took place effective the first day of April that year. The restructuring was made as part of the company's transformation to optimize operations and reduce costs. This comes after its counterpart, Royal Dutch Shell, announced that it would terminate 1,300 out of its 6,500 of its workers in Malaysia a year before. On March 30th, 2017, Petronas and Singaporean energy company Pavilion Energy inked a memorandum of understanding MOU to explore LNG collaboration opportunities. The deal was made to explore the supply and optimization of LNG, including spot trading and cargo swaps. 2 days later, on April 1st, Petronas PFLNG Satu, the world's first floating liquefied natural gas LNG facility, has achieved a new milestone with the successful loading of its first cargo at the Kanawit gas field offshore Bintulu, Sarawak. On July 25, 2017, Petronas canceled a $36 billion liquefied natural gas LNG project, the Pacific Northwest LNG, which was considered ambitious and a priority in the Canadian province of British Columbia. Both the company and the province blamed poor global LNG market conditions. On April 9, 2019, Petronas was praised for its role in Sudanese oil and gas industry by Minister of Oil and Gas Engineer Ya'kub Adam Bashir Gama. Later on April 15th, Petronas acquires 100% interest in the Singaporean energy company M+ Energy Solutions, also known as M+, as part of its strategy to move into renewable energy, pursuing high-growth business to complement of its business operations. In January 2020, prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, Petronas, through a subsidiary of Petronas LNG, signed Heads of Agreement (HOA) with Shenergy Group to supply approximately 1.5 million tons of annum of LNG of its Wuhugo receiving terminal in China. The agreement is 12-year term beginning in 2022 and ended in 2034. In 2024, Petronas Italy's Envalive SPA and Japan's Ijunia company announced a final investment decision to establish Biofinery in Malaysia. A joint venture will oversee the construction, slated to begin in the fourth quarter of this year at Petronas' integrated refinery and petrochemical complex in Pengerang, Johor. The facility is designed to process approximately 650,000 tons of raw materials annually, producing sustainable aviation fuel, hydrogenated vegetable oil, and bio-naphtha. The biofinery is expected to commence operations in the second half of 2028. And there's the history of Petronas. How did it become so popular? Well, I think with all those acquisitions and joint ventures that they did over the year, I think that's how they became very successful and how they got to the point where they are today. But anyways, with all that being said, I think I'm going to end off this video. If you guys haven't enjoyed this video, please make sure to hit the like button and also don't forget to subscribe because I try to do videos every single day. And also don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell on my other two channels as well, including exotic game walkthroughs, where I walkthrough videos for you guys, and I do plan on having a new LP on that channel for you guys very, very soon, and dance plays where I upload the RMVs with the swearing in them, and some exclusive content on there for you guys as well. And until then, I will see you guys in the next one. Goodbye!